This probably isn't what you expected to see when you clicked on a video about Darkest Dungeon, but don't worry, you're in the right place. What you're watching right now is HBO's Band of Brothers, one of the main inspirations behind the beloved roguelike indie game. Right here, the moment that First Lieutenant Buck Compton drops his helmet in despair. In an episode titled The Breaking Point, this is indeed Compton's own breaking point. And when you play Darkest Dungeon, your characters are going to reach a lot of them. Band of Brothers, based on the book of the same name, tells the tale of Easy Company, one of the most storied US infantry squads in World War II. The series ran on HBO in 2001. 15 years later, Darkest Dungeon saw its full release after a period of early access. The goal of the game is to get rid of the evil living under your newly inherited estate, and doing so means sending all types of recruits into the various dark dungeons beneath the surface, much like sending soldiers off to war. There are nearly 20 classes altogether, with a variety of upgrades and other RPG elements, and of course, a whole lot of situations that can go very, very wrong.
As life ebbs, terrible vistas of emptiness reveal themselves.
So let's make sure we're framing this whole thing correctly first. Darkest Dungeon is a game, inspired by an HBO show, based on a book that chronicles the wartime experiences of real soldiers. So as much as I'd like to wear this mask and make Plague Doctor jokes, it really wouldn't be in good taste. We're not going to focus on character archetypes or get lost in the weeds of story parallels either. To be clear, those things are all present. You've got ranged gunslingers, healers, frontline fighters, and everything in between. But what matters most is what those individuals are going through. During a Darkest Dungeon postmortem at the 2016 Game Developers Conference, design director Tyler Sigman made that concept very clear.
The inspiration for the Affliction System was not games, really. Although I'm about to show an image. It was more, human experience. Darkest Dungeon is a game about the human response to stress, and those are very different things.
This logline applies to Band of Brothers as well. Whether it's real-life war or battles against eldritch horrors, these moments of tension cause a great deal of stress, which can eventually break our heroes. Both of these pieces of media are about how people react to such moments. Some fly, some fall, but the oncoming stress is inevitable. This is why developer Red Hook Studios created the Affliction System.
So the Affliction System is the hook of the game. And that's really what we call the whole system for your heroes being human and sometimes basically being a bunch of unruly toddlers.
Here's how it works. Events and situations cause stress, and when enough stress builds up, characters face a resolve check. This then causes them to break down with an affliction or push through with a virtue. In Darkest Dungeon, this stress creeps in at every possible opportunity, even while you're just walking around the randomly generated dungeons. Less light, more stress. You can straight up die if you're too careless in the dark. Then there are curios, a catch-all term for the assorted objects found along the way. If you don't interact with them correctly, you'll be hit with even more stress, plus a variety of additional effects. Read the wrong books, and the horrific knowledge from within will mess with your mind and add new personality quirks. When it comes to actual combat, stress can be induced in many forms. Taking a critical hit can stress out the party, while dishing one can make them feel a bit better. Several enemies even have attacks that reach straight for the party's minds, dealing just a little physical damage but spiking their stress. All of this pushes party members closer to that breaking point. We can see that same slow push in Band of Brothers, even as far back as boot camp. Herbert Sobel, who commands the whole company, is shown to be a bad leader, using tactics that take things too far, even in a harsh military environment. Verbal abuse, exhausting extra training sessions, these things obviously caused increased levels of stress for his soldiers. During the same opening episode, the men of Easy Company write a joint letter to get Sobel removed from his station. As they prepare to sign off, First Sergeant Carwood Lipton lays out the show's thesis.
All right. Good. But we'd all better be clear of the consequences.
This statement looms over every event in Band of Brothers. Going to war, deploying onto the battlefield, the actions the soldiers take during a firefight, all of this comes with consequences. Diving into the titular dark dungeons, fighting the monsters within, and every step in between has the same consequences in the game, with quantifiable effects of stress. It's terrifying and honestly impressive that these can be triggered at any time. Just as Easy Company finds itself suddenly under fire on multiple occasions, our mercenaries in Darkest Dungeon are always at risk. Sitting around the fire and recuperating can be the calm before the storm in the case of nighttime ambushes. Patching up wounds can be good for topping off that HP, but stress is a separate, ever-present meter. Affliction is an all-in, always-on system.
So the important thing about the Affliction System is it's really the hook of the game. I mean, if it didn't work, the whole game premise falls down. We don't tell you what could happen. We don't tell you exactly what act-outs they might do or how they might, run to the front or reject healing. We want you to discover that through play.
But it's not just the players who discover how these things resolve. The characters don't even know how they're going to respond until the exact moment their stress maxes out. There are more afflictions in the game than virtues, so yeah, it's much more likely that the random number generator behind the scenes is going to dole out a bad thing. Now, for clarity's sake, let's hit pause for a second. The overall mechanic at play here is called the Affliction System, but when stress maxes out, characters can either be hit with an affliction or a virtue. So just to be clear, affliction refers to both the overall thing and the individual status effects. Now let's talk about some of these. The developers could have just crafted one universal broken mental state for all the characters, but instead, there are several afflictions. Hopeless characters get worse at attacking, dodging, and moving, and they might even refuse to retreat from battle because they've accepted defeat. Abusive characters make things worse for the rest of the party, causing stress to their own people. Sounds a bit like Sobel again, right? Just as there are several forms of affliction in Darkest Dungeon, there are several ways in which the men of Easy Company crack under pressure. Captain Lewis Nixon was known among the soldiers as a booze hound, and that habit was continually reinforced as the war went on. Lipton, whom we saw earlier, smokes for the first time after surviving a shelling at Bastogne. During the same attack, he begins laughing hysterically at the bombing all around him, because there was no logical way to react to that chaos, much like Darkest Dungeon's irrational affliction effect. Staff Sergeant Joe Toy loses a leg in the bombing, and that same irrationality rears its head as he screams about needing his helmet, despite his lost limb being a much more immediate problem.
I gotta get my helmet! Forget it! I gotta get my helmet! Forget it, Joe!
Fellow Sergeant William Garner attempts to pull Toy to safety, only to lose his own leg in the process. That brings us back to Compton, who finally snaps upon witnessing all this. Up until this point, he's been a cheery, upbeat member of the company. There's joy behind those bright eyes of his, but it's snuffed out during the battle at Bastogne.
There's this great scene where he just comes up and he just has the 1,000-yard stare, shell shock, takes off his helmet, and he's just done. That's it. His war is over. And I think that was really a moment that, in a way we wanted to capture.
I don't think there's any doubt that the team at Red Hook Studios successfully captured that feeling. Compton is forever changed by the bombing at Bastogne, and in the same vein, your Darkest Dungeon characters cannot walk away from a mission without being changed in some way themselves. Thankfully, the results aren't always negative, and since we always aim to be positive on this channel, let's talk about the other side of the coin. You see, Darkest Dungeon's Affliction System is both a warning and an inspiration. If the ongoing stress doesn't result in one of the game's many afflictions, the character will instead become virtuous. These are positive changes that actually help the rest of the team by reducing stress and buffing stats. And wouldn't you know it, Band of Brothers has a great example of this too.
Live!
Episode 3, Carentan, focuses on Private Albert Blythe, who's already showing signs of wear and tear when we first see him. As the battle in town progresses, he hits his own breaking point, reaching a state of hysterical blindness, which, by the way, that exact status also exists in Darkest Dungeon, as if the influence here wasn't already clear enough. Hysterical blindness is only a temporary loss of vision, but Blythe is still shaken after his eyes clear up. Later on, when Easy Company fights Germans in the ditches, he's unable to act, seizing up with all that fear and hopelessness that's all too common in these campaigns. It's only when he sees his commander, Major Dick Winters, firing above the foxhole that he's able to actually snap back into action. Blythe gets his own moment of virtue, rising out of cover to fire back at the enemy and fend off the attack. Stress is unavoidable. It's how we deal with it that matters. In Blythe's case, he pushes past hysterical blindness and paranoia to do his part in the battle. And he's not the only one. Easy Company is full of heroes who accomplish similar feats. Those real accounts of soldiers then influenced the development of Darkest Dungeon, specifically leading to the creation of the Affliction System. In every case, your mercs start stacking up stress, and that can result in a debuffing affliction or a display of virtue. That moment of truth even extends to us, the players.
We successfully not only made your heroes afflicted, we made the game players afflicted. How many of you have rage quit Darkest Dungeon? I don't know if I should ask this.
Look, I know it's corny and probably a bit facetious to end this video by talking about the players pushing through their own difficult times, but that is the positive takeaway here. Your characters may crack unpredictably under pressure, but when you face your own dark times, your response is up to you. I know I want to see you come out on top.
Even the dead can die again.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. If you like what Framework is doing, definitely hit that subscribe button in the middle. It would help me out an awful lot if you do. And if you want to see what we've already cooked up, you can hit that link on the far left. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.